Welcome, everybody, to Voices of Recovery. Today's guest is Roy Baas, and I'm your host, Gregory Greer. Today's guest, everybody, is the equivalent of what you might consider the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as to somebody in the state of Louisiana and even nationally, as somebody who has helped others not just get sober, but to help train professionals to engage the substance use disorder community. So please, everybody, welcome Roy Baas. Roy, yes, I put you, the equivalent of somebody in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, into the field of addiction and helping somebody. Would you agree or disagree?
Well, I don't know about Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I've been involved in a lot of things, a lot of projects. I think back when I first got sober after some struggles. I spent about 7.5 years in and out of recovery.
But see, the reason I bring that up is you're a superstar. And while people may not know your story, and I just want to share, oftentimes Roy has shared his story at other meetings and conferences, but you don't go fully into the who you are. Like, what position do you hold currently, professionally?
Well, the last 15 years, I've been the chairman of the Louisiana Addictive Disorders Regulatory Authority. And the 10 years prior to that, I served as the Region 8 on the Louisiana Commission for Addictive Disorders. So I've been involved in the politics, and I mean, there's a million stories about different influences at different times and how things came about.
And in the state of Louisiana, different states, as far as credentialing is concerned, Louisiana has, for the advanced addictive disorder license, licensed addictions counselor. And they're numbered in order as to who has obtained their licenses. What is your number?
479.
479. I don't know why I thought yours was number one, like you were the first LAC.
No. Clinical supervision. I'm a certified clinical supervisor.
Yeah.
And that number is 001. And on the international credentialing, my AADC credential is number 001. And the CCDPD credential is number 001.
What in the world is the CCD? Right.
It's a co-occurring disorders professional, and the D means a diplomat. So it's kind of the highest ranking you can get in that co-occurring disorders treatment system. I worked 15 years in the private psychiatric industry and working in acute care psychiatric hospitals doing addiction treatment. So, I mean, I've got tons and tons of experience in dealing with not just addiction, but co-occurring disorders as well. And a lot of experience with exclusive psych disorders, and whether that's in adults or adolescents. I even have some experience working in children's programs, that children under 10 years old. So been around a while, done a few things.
Well, you're recognized as a very brilliant individual. And listen, you're a very brilliant individual academically, especially with the presentations that you've given, very astute, but more importantly, very personable. So I've had the pleasure of being able to communicate with you, one-on-one and speak, I would say it vulnerably. Your journey, as far as how you got where you are and just being a human being, that to me speaks remarkably. And I love that. So I'm wondering, can you share how you got where you are?
Yeah, I can only credit those that went before me. I got sober in 1978 and went back to school, got my boiler engineering license, and did that for a while. Well, a little over a year, I guess. And anyway, my AA sponsor told me that I needed to be a counselor, and I really thought he was joking. I did. But
How come?
I don't know. I really don't.
You didn't see your talent then?
Well, he must have seen something in me that I didn't see.
Okay.
And back then there were like three ways. I was in Minnesota, and there were like three ways to become a credentialed addictions counselor. One was with the Hazelden training program. The other one was the state hospital system had a addictions counselor training program. And then the third one was the University of Minnesota. And he steered me into the university program. And I'm forever grateful for that, because I was exposed to so many just really profound professionals. And that professionalism was, it still echoes today. One of the things, when I was thinking about coming over here and talking, one of the things that I was thinking about was, our trade association, which is the Louisiana Association of Substance Abuse Counselors and Trainers.
LAC.
The ADRA, we're the licensing part of this field. Our job is to protect the public. LASAC's job is to look out for the counselors. And the ADRA, and I'm not sure exactly the numbers, but we credential somewhere around 1,500 addiction professionals across the state. Well, addiction and prevention professionals across the state. And yet LASAC membership is way less than half of that. And one of the things about professionalism was that I was told early on that if you're a professional, you need to act like one, you need to look like one, and a big part of acting like one is being a member of your trade association. And I think there's this illusion that exists in a lot of our professionals that they don't have to be involved in politics. But politics is always involved in you and in our career. And LASAC's job is to look out for that politics part of it. And if you're not a member, a participating member, at least in paying your dues, you're letting those other folks carry the freight for you. And that's not very professional. I was thinking there's a couple of political challenges that we're facing right now that I think they're, in my view, they're vitally important. And I've been around long enough to remember that, the addiction professional was originally almost 100% competence based. It was, can you do the job? It's not, can you sit in the classroom and get an education? It's, can you be effective with the people that you're working with? And because of political pressure and the rest of that, of course, we've had to succumb to the preeminence today of academics in our field. And you have to have the right degrees and the rest of that. We here in Louisiana, and like I said, we got lots of history. Back in the early 2000s, and I want to say around 2004, 2005, or maybe I should back it up a little bit. I moved here from Texas in 1993, and I was helping with the Texas legislation. In fact, we got it through the LCDC, the Licensed Chemical Dependency Counselor in Texas. And then I moved here, and Louisiana was set up. There were two credentialing boards, and there was a lot of flack about, which credential I needed and how do I go about getting them. And the assistant secretary for addictive disorders had said he wanted a single credential, and he had hired a fellow that to actually facilitate that. And I mean, there was some struggle, and they got a piece of legislation passed that back then it was called the LSBCSAC, the Louisiana State Board of Addictions Counselors, or something along those lines. But what they had done was they had narrowed the field based on primarily academics, and kind of did away with a large portion of our providers, the individual providers. So I was asked if I would chair a committee to rewrite that legislation, and that's where we came up with the tiered system in Louisiana that the ADRA regulates. It's a registered addictions counselor, certified addictions counselor, and then licensed addictions counselor. And there were several nose bumps that we had at that time. I was working in the private psychiatric industry in '96 when I got appointed to the Commission for Addictive Disorders.
So that was in Louisiana, '96, right?
Right.
Because what's interesting, you said '93?
I moved here in '93, yes.
Because Palmetto Addiction Recovery Center opened right around that time.
Yeah.
And I think you had some involvement with that too.
Yeah, I wrote the original program narrative.
Yeah, y'all hear that? Y'all didn't know that, did you? I just think that's important to know just how many fingers and so many pies that you've been engaged in this community. I mean, you have
they wanted to get it started, and they didn't. He wanted good staff. I had a good friend of mine that I'd met over in Texas, and he and his wife were both brilliant. His wife was a nurse practitioner, and he was an addictions counselor. Dr. Cook actually had tried to hire me to work at Palmetto, and I said, no, I was doing anyway. But I recommended that he hire those two, and he did, and he brought them over, and I had written a program narrative. It was actually called a written plan for professional services for an inpatient psychiatric facility, and we just modified that, and that's what Palmetto used as their original program narrative to outline their services.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I just thought it was interesting because it just hit me, and I'm a little ADD, so I'll sneak in.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got anyway.
So '96 in the psychiatric.
Yeah, '96 I got appointed to the Commission for Addictive Disorders.
Yeah.
Well, back then, I'm guessing around 80% of the addiction treatment that was provided in the state of Louisiana was being provided by civil servants. And I was in the private psych industry, and I said, I made the comment at a commission meeting that I didn't think it was really fair or whatever, that if you were a private provider, worked in the private industry, you needed to be licensed, you needed to be credentialed. But if you were a civil servant, you did not. The civil service had their own credentialing system. And the secretary for addictive disorders picked up on that and says, well, let's get our civil servants credentialed. And they had consolidated the board, so there was a single board. And so we went through the process of helping all of those state civil servants get past the exam, and get credentialed. Meet the criteria for their portfolios, learn how to put them together, and all the rest of that stuff. And that was about '97, '98. And then the other board, the LSBCSAC, was having some difficulties. And anyway, it kind of folded, and the Office for Addictive Disorders took over the responsibility for the licensing board temporarily, and then reestablished a new board, and anyway, implemented that. It was called Act 803, which was the tiered system of credentialing. So that we brought in a whole new group of providers, and we certainly acknowledged the academics, that's the LAC, and the CAC. But we also maintained the history of competence.
Let me ask you a question. You said that because LAC, and I'm sorry to get you off task. It's just me.
Yeah.
The LAC, because in the state of Louisiana, when you say the RAC, the CAC, and the LAC, it's different than other states. Because in the state of Louisiana, if somebody has an LAC, they can operate a private practice.
Right.
And in other states, the AADC, if I said that correctly, they cannot. So it's interesting that the state of Louisiana has permitted such, whereas other states do not.
Well, basically the academic requirements for an LAC are the same as like an LPC or a LCSW. It's a master's degree in a human service field. There are some peculiar pieces that the LAC academics require that others don't, and vice versa. The social work has their own particular requirements, as does professional counseling. We also have a large professional population in Louisiana that have a master's degree in criminal justice, that are service providers as well. But anyway, we implemented the new law and kind of put together this process of the assistant secretary wanted like a career ladder, a way to go from ground zero, up through the ranks, whether it start off as a tech in a treatment facility, hopefully end up with like an RAC or maybe a CAC, or go back to school, get your master's, and end up with a LAC. When you say that LACs can practice independently and open a practice on their own license, that's part and parcel of what I'm talking about when I say LASAC is the advocacy crew. That's where the pressure came to include the LACs in what Louisiana calls LMHPs, licensed mental health professionals.
Right.
And it was through LASAC's efforts that LACs got on that list. So, there's lots of reasons to be supportive of LASAC.
Well, I think it's important because what audiences we're having right now are those that are seeking to be a counselor. So you have trained CITs.
Oh, yeah.
And for there to have some awareness, and one, I'm glad you brought up, because part of Voices of Recovery is to unite all the treatment programs, but mostly the professional community, recovery community, professional recovery community, and to work together. And letting them know that there's a professional body to be a part of. What's that look like? That advocacy, because if working together is going to create a movement that allows to have some change versus putting all the weight on the organization itself.
Well, and one of the other elements in that process is each region of the state has what they call a SACO, a substance abuse counselors organization. And we started, since I've been here, we've started one twice here in the northeast corner, Region 8. And both times it has collapsed through lack of support. And that SACO is where, how do I put this? The LASAC board is made up of board members that each one is nominated by one of the SACOs. They're actually elected by that regional substance abuse counselors organization, recommended to the LASAC board, and then the board just simply approves the nominations. There's a second role in LASAC that LASAC is also the representative board in the state of Louisiana to the ICNRC, which is the International Consortium of Reciprocity for Counselors. That was originally formed back in the late 70s, early 80s to set standards for credentialing addiction professionals internationally. And that's basically the standards that we use here in Louisiana. In fact, that 3-tiered system was originally an ICNRC system. And the reason the ADRA is not the ICNRC representative board in Louisiana is because I don't know how to put this delicately.
Just say
the legislature in Louisiana said we want to set our own standards.
right.
We don't want some international outfit, telling us what our standards are going to be, which is absolutely fine.
Well, I want to speak to that because I am a certified group psychotherapist with American Group Psychotherapy Association.
Right.
They would not, and I have a master's degree in social work. I have not passed my LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, and taken it, and that's not the point of it. But I was able to pass the LAC exam because of the ICNRC, and it took 6 months through the membership committee for the CGP, Certified Group Psychotherapy, to be approved. They did that because they did the research with the ICNRC, and because of the ICNRC, they gave me the CGP credential, and I'm part of the special interest group chair of addictions and recovery with AGPA, but it's because of ICNRC.
Yeah.
But and I'm speaking to how important they are, because if Louisiana, if they were going to say, here's our standards, I'm not saying Louisiana wouldn't have met the criteria, but ICNRC being a legal, entity of sorts that gives definition, that's what supported my approval.
Yeah, they're like I say, it's an international organization. It's a lot of ancient history. There were actually 2 organizations, the ICNRC and NADAC, the National Addictions Counselors Association. NADAC was originally supposed to be the advocacy group for addictions counselors at the federal level. They were supposed to be like LAC is at the state level, NADAC was supposed to be at the federal level. But NADAC decided that they wanted to get into the credentialing business as well. And I don't know if there's a credential called the SAP.
I'm familiar.
Which is it's a substance abuse professional, and it's a designation that the Department of Transportation uses in having people that work in safety-sensitive jobs to, instead of being fired, to get into rehab. And when I say DOT safety sensitive, I mean it's, there are elements in the FAA, there are elements in the Coast Guard, there are elements in the Railroad Association, there are elements of that DOT safety sensitive positioning in standard manufacturing jobs. If I'm working at a plant that makes bolts and those bolts will end up in a submarine someplace, I'm a DOT sensitive position, safety sensitive position. And in order to facilitate that, there's this SAP designation that the Department of Transportation has. And ICNRC was the one that intervened in the Department of Transportation and said, okay, we're the ones that set the standards internationally. Anyone that meets our standards ought to be able to be an SAP. And the Department of Transportation said, yeah, okay. NADAC, on the other hand, said, no, the only people that can be SAPs are the ones that are credentialed by us. And anyway, it was a mess.
Sounds like a cluster.
Yeah, it was. But the ICNRC ultimately won out, and that was because there are so many more ICNRC under the credentialed people under that ICNRC umbrella than there are under the NADAC credential. NADAC is still there, and it still advocates on a national level. And Louisiana disaffiliated with NADAC there's a whole bunch of history with that too. But anyway, I guess the message that I would like to send to people is, if you don't think you have what it takes to be a political activist, you need to be involved with a group that provides that service. Because, I mean, our legislature gets together in Baton Rouge, and I mean, there's a tremendous amount of kind of misinformation about not only what addiction is, but what addiction treatment is. And we need a clear voice in the legislature providing information to those folks so they have a far better understanding. That's like I was talking with some friends the other day. The way we're set up here in Louisiana is, a few years ago, in fact, I was on the transition committee where we switched from, we had three offices: the Office for Developmental Disabilities, the Office for Mental Health, and the Office for Addictive Disorders. And they put the three together under an umbrella called the Office for Behavioral Health. And there's a push from the federal government that the Office for Behavioral Health needs to integrate with primary health. And I'm certainly not opposed to that. The problem with it is understanding addiction is it's a whole different thinking system. And I mean, I could tell you lots and lots of stories about, but I'll tell you one of the things that, in fact, this happened Wednesday. Our local residential treatment facilities are pretty much all what they call co-occurring qualified, which means they've got, the ability to deal with both
mental
substance use and psychiatric medical problems, that kind of thing. The addiction recovery system here in Louisiana has a group of service providers that are really not professional. They're called sober living homes. And they are designed to help people maintain recovery once they've completed a primary addiction treatment program and move into the community. Well, those places, I mean, there's no professional staff. I mean, some of them do. Some of them have.
You mean the sober living?
Yeah, the sober living folks.
Right.
And these residential facilities are co-occurring qualified, but the sober living homes are not.
Correct.
And what ends up happening is, and like I say, this just happened Wednesday. I work with some of the folks in sober living, and a lady that was in a local treatment center certainly has some addiction problems, but primary diagnosis is psychiatric.
Yep.
And she's not capable of getting a job and sustaining it. I mean, she's never been able to, probably never will be. She was sent to a sober living home, and she was told she needed to get a job and start paying rent. And she was just completely lost, didn't know what to do, ended up back on the street because she couldn't pay her rent. But she'd learned that if she would use an opiate or a little amphetamine or something, go back to the treatment center, she could test positive and get another 30-day stay.
But with the big, beautiful bill, if that goes through, as far as how it's laid out, if they don't complete treatment and go through the different modalities, drop into, residential, if partial's approved, IOP, then, or intensive outpatient, then sober living. If they don't do that continued care and complete it, they're not able to return, if I understand that correctly. And that's going to reduce the recidivism
Well, it may reduce the recidivism, but back in the 60s and 70s when they emptied the state hospitals, uh, that population basically split in two. About half of them went into the Department of Corrections and the other half went to the street people, homeless.
Right.
Um, and if I have a major psychiatric diagnosis and I'm not able to get a job and pay rent, what does that mean? Does that mean that, there was that Investigate News a couple of days ago talked about a guy that killed his mother because of lack of mental health services and ended up in prison. Well, is that where we want to put our psychiatric population, is in prisons or under the bridge?
Until the numbers are overwhelming and they influence the rest of society negatively, and it's just my personal assessment, there will be no change. That's just my interpretation. And you correct me if I'm wrong, because when I see the best prediction of the future is the past, because like say you can go to any other large metropolitan area where you see the homeless community continue to evolve and grow, those services aren't they're not available, and
Right.
so where's the money going to come to assist? And that's wonderful to assist, but the magic is to find the precipitating factors and intervene before it continues to grow. Otherwise, we're just feeding a cycle, or at least that's, and I could be wrong.
Okay,
I mean, I'm reserved, right?
let me bring that back home.
Okay.
I personally probably am not going to have any major impact on coming up with the finances that are required to take care of that population.
Right.
However, I do have a professional responsibility to make sure that I am as well informed as possible and that I am as well trained as possible. We talk about clinical supervision for counselors in training. What about clinical supervision for counselors? There's always, at least in my experience, there's always been room for improvement. There are ways for me to advance my skill level. There are ways for me to expand my knowledge base. There are always methods and mechanisms available to me to become a more profound professional than I am today. And I maintain a level of clinical supervision with about a half a dozen peers. Although I'm not working full-time anymore, I still work with a small group of folks in sober living. And I need clinical supervision as badly as the person that just got their counselor in training certificate. I saw an ad on Facebook the other day. I love it. Lady was talking about she got her CCS, she got her certified clinical supervisor's ticket, and was basically announcing that she was eligible to start supervising CITs.
That's Brooke.
Yeah, I think that is so powerful, so wonderful. We have a tremendous shortage of qualified clinical supervisors in this state. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's a national problem, and we're part of it. We don't have enough qualified clinical supervisors to provide intense supervision that's required in order to move from a counselor in training certificate to an actual credential. And actually, CIT is not a certificate; it's a learning status. It's a status. It's not a credential.
I'm glad you brought that up, because just recently, treatment centers, and I brought this up with both Lauren Beck and then Sean Eves and another previously, that treatment centers would open up to save money, hire some CITs and just plug them in.
Right.
Recently, CITs are not, I don't say allowed, permitted to facilitate groups in intensive outpatient level of care, but residential with supervision to increase and.
Well, if you read the guidelines on the ADRA website for CITs and CCSs, CITs are not permitted to do anything without a licensed mental health professional in the room with them. Once they've completed their initial 300 hours of direct face-to-face clinical supervision, they can practice intake, orientation, screening, and client education. And that's it. Unless the CCS that's supervising them signs off on the specific competence. And there are 123 of those competences listed in TAP 21. If you read the guidelines, CCSs, that's their job, is to supervise those CITs in those 123 competences. The way I do it is, if you're a CIT under my supervision, you demonstrate to me that you are competent in each one of those 123. Once you've demonstrated competence in it, I can sign off on that competence and you can practice in that area without me being in the room with you or another licensed mental health professional. Like I say, CIT is a learning status. It's not a practice credential. And the guidelines are, if you haven't completed that first 300 hours of direct clinical supervision, you're not supposed to be doing anything without another licensed mental health professional in the room with you. So the ADRA does not have a budget for enforcement.
Thank you for answering my question. Because I was going there.
So if there's something happening that is illegitimate, the only way the ADRA gets an opportunity to investigate that is if there's a formal complaint filed with the ADRA. If a complaint is not filed, we don't have a team of investigators we can send out. And if you look at the way the Louisiana Department of Health, HSS in particular, the health standards, used to have a whole team of investigators, licensing review agents. And if you were a licensed facility, every once in a while, one of those HSS employees would stop in and say, I want to look at what you're doing and how you're doing it. Well, in order to eliminate state employment and, reduce state cost, the LDH decided that what they would do is take the accreditation standards and turn them into the licensing standards. And that way, then if you're accredited, you're not subject to licensing review. If you're an accredited facility, you're not subject to licensing review. Well, the accreditation is a 3-year process. You get your accreditation and then you're good for the next 3 years, and then they come back and do it again. Well, there's nobody monitoring what happens during that stretch of time other than the potential for, like, if you're an insurance investigator come in, whether that's, one of the private insurance companies or Medicaid reviewer or Medicare reviewer, something like that. So there isn't any mechanism for policing what CITs are actually doing.
Oh, I follow. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're clarifying it too. For anyone who's listening, those that are seeking to be a CIT, want to further a career in counseling, and you're, I wouldn't say an encyclopedia, but you're an amazing wealth of knowledge base that I think, as you said earlier, if you doubt that you have the ability, get involved. And if you get involved by proxy, I don't know if that was the right way, you'll download this information. You will not transmute. You won't, how plants grow more. What's that word? What's that word when a plant grows from sunlight? Was it mito? Was it
Migrate?
I don't know. Plants grow from green to sun. Anyway, so what happens is we blossom. That's not it. But I have to be planted. I have to be planted in this environment in order to grow.
And that's one of the other elements in being a professional is I need to associate myself with other professionals, because everybody that I come in contact with has information I don't have. Everyone, and I mean literally everyone I come in contact with has information that I do not have. And if I want to be a consummate professional, I need to regularly interact with other professionals and glean what they have to improve myself. I love there's an old quote by Einstein, and it was one of those, a reporter stopped him on the street one day. This is the story. And said, can you, in layman's terms, explain your theory of relativity? And he says, well, in physics, he says, it's actually a theory. He says, but in human relationships, it's an absolute. He said, if you want to improve the entire universe, all you have to do is improve you. And everyone around you has to improve to compensate for the improvement you made. We all exist in relation to everybody else. And I take that to heart. I mean, if I'm going to be a good, well-rounded professional, I need to spend time with good, well-rounded professionals.
So that speaks to my favorite, and the reason I'm bringing it up is at the time, less than 5 minutes left. I wanted to, if I were to put this into recovery perspectives or principles, the 12 traditions, that tradition number one is our common welfare should come first. The individual recovery depends on a unity. So as a professional body, the unity depends upon the priority of investing.
Well, we need to practice these principles in all of our affairs, and that includes the seventh tradition, which says, we're self-supporting through our own contributions. If you're along for a free ride, you're not following the principles either. I was going to say that in about 2 weeks, a little less, we have our annual LAC conference. It is the one time each year where you have an opportunity to expose yourself in a huge way to probably the largest gathering of addiction professionals in the state of Louisiana. You get out there at LAC and start rubbing shoulders and talking to people, sitting next to folks in those presentations, discussing the stuff that's being presented, attend the annual membership meeting, whether you're a member or not, attend the meeting, see what this organization is, see what LAC is about, inform yourself, expose yourself, get involved. Anyway.
That's perfect, because this should air right as the conference is beginning. July 27th through July 30th will be the LAC conference. And as many that will be attending, there'll be the membership meeting, and that those can learn, that attend. And the membership, that's something that this program also seeks to advocate, is to increase membership with LAC, so that body has some further resources to continue to do, which is to help work with the counselors.
Well, and I would also love to see some fine, upstanding young professional in this region, the 13 parish northeast corner of Louisiana, initiate forming another SACO. I'll sign up immediately. Tell me what your dues are going to be, and I'll write you a check, and we'll get it rolling.
I think you and Sean Eves and another have been doing a quarterly presentation that has been pretty effective and impactful with the professional community here. And again, that brings other clinicians from other facilities together, and that's what this thing is to unify, or at least that's my goal.
Well,
mission.
And our agenda for the next training, which the next quarterly training, is ethics and confidentiality. And I don't know if anybody's anyway, I've been rereading through the 42 CFR Part 2, which is the specific federal regulation that regulates confidentiality in addiction programs, was rewritten, and there are some fairly major changes in it. And if you're not aware of what 42 CFR Part 2 is, I would strongly recommend you attend that next quarterly training here locally.
Right.
And especially, I mean, ethics threads through everything. And, you know, when you mention practicing these principles in all our affairs, whether that, you know, that unity
Right.
and all the rest of those pieces, we did a training. In fact, the first one that we did was on Jackie Small's book, Becoming Naturally Therapeutic. Well, Jackie Small is a very prolific author, and she wrote a book on Gnosticism, which is not what most people think it is.
Yeah. Marcus Aurelius.
Well, yeah, it's you know, she kind of starts off on the Gnostic Gospels, but still, there's a whole process.
That's Stoicism I was going on with, not Gnosticism in Egypt. I'm sorry, I went another route.
Well, it's an expansion on the principle that's in the big book, where it says deep down in every man, woman, and child is the basic concept of God. You know, and how does that deep down inside every man, woman, and child, how does that manifestation of God express itself in your individual life? You know, when you start talking about ethics and, you know, I think about like Hillsdale College has all these free online courses, and there's one on ethics that is just absolutely profound. I mean, they're free. Sign up, sit down, listen to them. I mean, where else are you going to get that kind of education for free?
I think it's beautiful.
Ever expanding. That whole process of Gnosticism, and how does God express Himself? How does my consciousness of God express itself through my life? You know, you said, how did I get here? Well, I can tell you exactly how I got here. Following the directions of someone other than me. You know, my directions got me to the point of suicide. And I mean, I just needed to follow someone else's instructions, and that's what I've been doing. And, you know, when my original sponsor said you need to be a counselor, I followed his instructions, and I've been following someone else's instructions ever since.
Well, to me, that sounds brilliant. Well, it's brilliant if I'm somebody who goes to that dark place, which I myself have a history similarly. And so I relate to that. And I would like to invite you back to go more into that story another time, if you're interested in returning to go into that part of your journey.
Well, 46 years of, a little over 46 years of abstinence from drugs and alcohol. There have been some experiences along the way, some of them very profound and some of them pretty mundane. One of the things that I'm involved with right now is a small group of people. We're studying this little book called The Unpopular Studies in the Last 3 Steps. And one of the elements in spirituality, when you get to a point where something is exciting and spiritually, you know, enlightening, and you commit to that process and you commit to it, down the road a ways, it may become a little mundane and a little boring. And are you willing to do the spiritual drudgery to follow through on what your original commitment is when the excitement is gone?
See, I think that's with any relationship. You have the infatuation stage. You go into it, you're excited. That 7-year itch with any relationship, I see that with those in recovery. They get into that point, and it's like they've settled in. They're not really, that part of the relationship hasn't committed because they don't have the excitement any longer. And what am I doing for discipline? But that I think we could bring up another time if
well, I could talk to that for a while. I mean,
I know, but I'm thinking, if we can come back and we can, and with your own experience, because today, and I think this is important, and timeliness, right before the LASAC conference, you had a wealth of information that I think is extremely important. And so I'm very hopeful to have those that go to the LASAC conference that'll, chime in, be able to listen to you and what you have, because there's more to you than just information. I say that because if I'll zoom in, look at the tie. See, this tie speaks of amazing personality. No, you have an amazing sense of humor, and there's so much that I would love to just let that heart out, because you do. You have an amazing heart. And for those that have worked with you that seek sobriety, those that have worked with you to better themselves as a clinician, and those that have a relationship with you, I've never heard anything negative. It's always been a profound sense of love with you. And so I'm extremely grateful. I know I've had some conversations with you that have a lot of value for me. And while we're running out of time for today, I want to invite that back if we can and go through that. But I think for the LASAC conference, man, I'm thrilled to death with what we discussed today.
Well, and I would strongly encourage anyone that watches this, that if you're at the LASAC conference, please come say hi. I love people, and so come get connected.
Amen. Thank you for being with us today. And I want to thank the audience and those that was with us. Please subscribe. This is Voices of Recovery, and we're here to unite and unify the professional recovery community to be a part of, and as Roy Baas said, affect change. So for you, I say, namaste.